For those of you tuning in this morning expecting to hear from Pastor Rick Warren, we were too. But the pastor's representatives canceled moments before the scheduled interview, saying that Mr. Warren is sick from exhaustion.
Welcome back. Of course, that was George Stephanopoulos yesterday morning. A week ago, Pastor Warren said this, however, to Larry King.
I am not an anti-gay or anti-gay marriage activist. Never have been, never will be. During the whole Proposition 8 thing, I never once went to a meeting, never once issued a statement, never once even gave an endorsement in the 2 years Prop 8 was going. The week before the vote, somebody in my church said, Pastor Rick, what do you think about this? And I sent a note to my own members that said, I actually believe that marriage really should be defined, that definition should be saved between a man and a woman.
Well, that statement may have sounded odd to many people who heard Pastor Warren in a video back before the election. Here he is in that video.
Now, let me just say this really clearly. We support Proposition 8. And if you believe what the Bible says about marriage, you need to support Proposition 8.
Well, an aide to Rick Warren emailed Politico's Mike Allen an explanation which said, quote, when Pastor Warren told Larry King that he never campaigned for California's Proposition 8, he was referring to not participating in the official two-year organized advocacy effort specific to the ballot initiative in that state. Based on his focus and leadership on other compassion issues, because he's a pastor, not an activist, in response to inquiries from church members, he issued an email and video message to his congregation days before the election, confirming where he and Saddleback Church stood on this issue. Well, with us now is U.S. News' Dan Gilgoff. He'll be with us in a moment. And Politico's Mike Allen. Mike, you first. Let me get to this. What is this going on? I mean, he sounds like, I'm not going to name names, but certain politicians we've dealt with over the years who say one thing and then later explain what they meant, which was totally different than what they implied, because they wanted to imply something different. He said he didn't put out any kind of a statement. He said all he did was knock out a note to some of his members. It turns out that note was a statement specific to Proposition 8, which he did on camera as a video statement. So what is it? What's he up to? Is he playing one way to the mainstream audience that watches Larry King and playing differently to his church membership and to the people on his side of the cultural issue?
Well, Chris, that's exactly the danger here, and you have set up the facts exactly right. There's a danger here that Reverend Warren, who's done a lot of good, has brought a lot of people to Christ, is going to look like the parsing parson here. One of his aides told me that he feels a little bit like the Civil War soldier who wore a Union coat and Confederate pants. He got shot at by both sides. And here's what's happening. The mainstream is after Pastor Rick, as he calls himself, for not clearing up this clear contradiction that you pointed to. And evangelicals aren't happy because they're saying, why are you ashamed of this position? Why are you walking away from being against gay marriage? Concerned that he's trying to curry the favor of the mainstream out of fear of man.
Well, is he trying to be Billy Graham, someone who was able to do both, be an evangelical and also a popular figure? In other words, a person of hard religious conviction, but a man who had such charm and easygoing political sense that he was able to reach a larger audience, at least in terms of his good intentions.
Well, and Chris, Pastor Warren has done that extremely successfully. He's short of God who wrote the Bible. He's the best-selling author of all time. A Purpose-Driven Life is in more hands than any other book in the United States except for the Bible. And so it's clear what he meant here. What he meant here was, I don't want to be a cultural warrior. My calling is not to deal with gay marriage. He wanted to make it clear he was not beating the drum on that issue. All of that is true. The problem was, what he said was that he didn't endorse it, and he is going to have to correct the record about that specific literal point.
Well, I think this is all in the nuance, but if you sit down before a TV camera and you approve a script and then you recite the script on camera, you're putting out a broadcast, basically, aren't you? I mean, you're not exactly hiding your positions under your pillow.
Well, of course, and something else that Reverend Warren said, and I think that you and I can both sympathize with, he says anybody who makes a lot of public statements should get at least 10% grace. And well, I think everybody will agree with that, but you have to, as pastors will tell you, own your stuff. There was a misstatement of fact here. He's going to have to come out and fix it. I checked today. He doesn't have an interview scheduled. Eventually, he's going to do that. But and then he's free to go on to make this larger point, which I think is true, that he doesn't want this issue to be associated with it. That it's true that he was not campaigning for it. He was not out rallying for it. All that's true, but you just have to be careful about your little words, especially when, like you, because of his success, people are looking for you to stumble.
Well, let's go to Dan Gilgoff. Dan, what do you make of this? Because the thing about religion is, and it's what's sticky about it, is that it's belief. And it is, in some sense, an exclusive belief. You believe one thing is true fundamentally in life. The purpose of your being is is your religious belief. And people are going to disagree with that. And it's not going to be a popular statement because it's going to exclude other people generally. Is this what he's trying to do, make himself inclusive when he really is a religious leader who has to be, to some extent, exclusive? Some will be saved and some won't.
Yeah, and I think what he's trying to do is something that's pretty unique in American politics and in American religion, and that is to try to carve out something of a middle path in both the religious America and a political America that has become very polarized. And so what I think is so fascinating about this episode is that the last time that Rick Warren really reared his head publicly was on January 20th when he delivered the invocation at President Obama's inauguration. Of course, you remember that caused a huge outcry among liberal activists, among gay rights activists. So what Warren did was really disappeared for a few months, didn't give any interviews whatsoever to let this political storm blow over. Then the moment that he does come back, he grants this interview to Larry King, and he weighs in on the gay marriage question. He doesn't come out forceful enough for it, seems to disown his support for Proposition 8, and now all of a sudden it's the right that's angry at him. And so I think it's telling that anytime he comes out and makes a public appearance, he's ticking off one side politically. But what's so unique about him is that it's first the left, and now he comes out after a 3-month silence, and it's the right that's up in arms.
You know, Mike and Dan, I was at an event of the Aspen Institute out in Aspen, Colorado a couple of years ago, and he was a very nice guy to an audience, a large audience of different kinds of people. It was a secular crowd. And a woman a bit younger than me stood up and said, I'm a Jewish woman. Can I be saved? Can I go to heaven? And he said, by my religious lights, no. It was a very cold, you could say, answer, but he said it in a very mannerly way. And isn't this a classic situation where a person's religious beliefs are never going to sell to the mainstream audience? They're never going to be acceptable to everyone because it's obviously his view, which is obviously going to turn off people who don't share it in a most fundamental way, Mike. How can he mainstream evangelicalism? I just wonder how he can do it.
Well, you can't round off the edges, but be careful how you use mainstream. Christians are a majority of this country. It's not a minority that he's talking to there. But you're right that if he sugarcoats what he says, if he waters it down in the pursuit of his effort to pursue what he calls the gospel of grace, that is to emphasize issues that we all can agree on, which would include concern for the environment, compassion for gay people, other issues like that, you are going to lose your base. And Chris, you know, one of the first laws in politics is you have to keep your base before you can go out and be successful elsewhere. So what he has to do...
So Dan, where's he going to end up? Is he going to back up? He's going to support Prop 8, or is he going to go back to a more generalized, popular seeking position here?
Well, what he's going to do is going to support Prop 8 and make that clear. But what's happening here is that we are witnessing Rick Warren in this really fascinating moment where he is catapulting himself from a national and local leader onto the international stage. And he is attaining a level of influence that is really unknown even to him. And so what happens is you have a congregationally based pastor who's used to speaking to, sure, tens of thousands of people, but they're all like-minded evangelicals who are turning out to see him on Sunday. Now what happens is he's going to, you know, an invocation for the president, an appearance on national television, and weighing in on his political issues. This is a guy who doesn't even have a speechwriter. He doesn't have people who he vets things by. So now he's talking as if he was talking to fellow Christians who will cut him some slack, and he's not anymore. And I think he's going to have to be a little bit, I think he's going to be a little bit more prepared going forward.
Well, he should use you as his advisor. You were very well spoken on that matter. Thank you, Dan Gilgoff of U.S. News, and Mike Gowan of Politico, as always, sir.